Someone miscalculated. When you leave your planet behind, leave your friends and family back on Earth, and brave the stars to find the answers for them, you place your trust in a lot of people. Some of those people are complete strangers. Some have faces you've never seen, but you still trust them, based on their degrees and credentials. They spent 5 years calculating everything about this trip, making sure that the potential gain amounted to more than the sacrifice of 17 years of a few young men's lives. Yet, somewhere along the line, someone botched it. Someone forgot to carry a digit, or misplaced a decimal, or failed to account for an important variable or coefficient. In the end, I'm the one who paid the price. Cryosleep is a bitch. The wake-up call is uncomfortable, to say the least. 3 years seem to pass in an instant in that frozen state, but your body knows all too well where the time went. I stepped out of that pod on weak legs and fell to my knees, my skin on fire from the drastic temperature change. My head spun and my body quaked with the unpleasant rhythm of dry heaves, as my nerves suddenly came to attention. As I hunched over and retched out the ghost contents of my stomach, my mind slowly came to terms with reality. It took me a good 20 minutes to get to my feet, and another 15 or so in the hot steam bath before my eyes focused. Just as I stepped into my jumpsuit, I realized that I hadn't heard a single sound from below decks, and that wasn't good. The engineers of this ship stationed only my cryopod so close to the bridge, and for a good reason. As the helmsman, I would be the one roused early in the event of an emergency. Needless to say, I assumed the worst. My state of alarm should have hastened me, but I still took it slow and steady. I was unstable and didn't want to wind up too ill to fulfill my duty. Half hobbling, and feeling the ground shift beneath my feet, the walk down the corridor leading to the bridge seemed 10 times longer than usual, and 100 times quieter. The less I heard, the more I worried. As I stepped through the portal, I could see the pale green orb in the seeming middle distance through the command deck's master display. However long ago, we had arrived, which meant that I should not have been the only one awake. The rest of the crew should have crowded the halls by then, gearing up for touchdown in the coming few days. Something was definitely wrong. I took a seat at the head console, and the chair was cold and stiff. With the crew asleep for the majority of the trip, all systems unnecessary to the ship's movement, life support, and the preservation of resources were shut down. Wasting power by leaving the heating system running made no sense. It perfectly matched the cold feeling in my stomach as the ship's status blinked to life on my holomonitor. 3 power routing failures, 8 life support system maintenance alerts, 5 near-miss debris impacts around the fusion core, and 2 weight adjustment cargo purges, with who knows how many indispensable resources on board. It was a fucking disaster. And I didn't know whether I should be distraught or furious, or both. It was Earthside Command's job to remotely monitor and operate the ship's vital processes. How could they let it get this bad? What if we were thrown off course and wound up as a smoldering crater on some uncharted planet? This wasn't right. And then I saw the date. They called it the Twin Paradox. For a long time it was only a thought experiment in special relativity, nothing more than equations on monitors and paper. The idea was that time moves slower for bodies traveling at near light speed, asserting that a set of twins would age differently if one was rocketed into distant space. As the numbers had it, the space twin would return a few years younger than his brother on Earth. It turned out to be more than just an abstract concept, but someone miscalculated, and the time dilation far exceeded their expectations. We deployed for this far-flung rock in the beginning of the fall season. Stardate 2256.08. It was a summer I dwelt on for countless days, since the moment I stepped aboard the pan-galactic starship Odyssey, and even more since I thawed out. That was the summer of my little boy's 4th birthday, the last day I spent with him before pre-mission conditioning and launch 3 months later. It's hard to explain to a 4-year-old why Daddy won't be around anymore. They sent us to find a new home for humanity after learning of a seismic upheaval destined to take the surface of the Earth in the coming century and a half. Still, a child's world is small and simple at that age. A child that young knows nothing of world heroism or the good of mankind. To him, I was already a hero. As far as he was concerned, I was abandoning him. We spent the day alone, just the two of us. He said he didn't want a party, that he just wanted to be with Daddy. There were more tears than smiles that day. I promised him that I would be home for his 21st birthday, and that we'd have his first drink together. I told him to take pictures every day, that I wanted him to capture every memory I would miss. Through everything I told him, he just kept nodding his head with tears in his eyes, hearing my words but likely not listening to them. Nothing I could say would help. All I could do was make him promises that he wouldn't understand for years to come. A profound sorrow overtook me the moment the galactic calendar readout expanded across my holo monitor. I would not have the chance to share that drink with my son. In fact, I wouldn't even be home to see my grandson's graduation, or for my great-grandson to bury me in the family plot. There would be no stories to tell to my great-great-grandchildren. Like an epitaph on an ancient gravestone, the calendar readout grimly displayed. Stardate SD 2468.02. In 3 short years, which had moments ago felt so long, we had lost over 2 centuries. I only know how long I sat in that chair because of the time display constantly hovering in my peripheral vision. As the hours trudged past in the ever-present daylight of our orbit, what was there to do other than sit back and contemplate the hopeless facts? Did it really matter why the other crew weren't filling the rest of the seats around me? Did it really matter whether or not the landers ever left the docking bay? There was no mission anymore. By then, the surface of the Earth would have been more than half consumed by thunderstorms and boiling lakes of lava. Either humanity had found another home amongst the stars without us, or they had vanished into the fire and poisoned atmosphere with the rest of the planet. Earthside HQ no longer existed. Our superior officers would have died over a century ago, and they would have given us up for dead long before then. We were floating in the cold vacuum of space alone, light years from home, and likely the last of our kind. Our kind, I thought. I may have been using that term prematurely. I panned over to the Deck 3 cryo chamber status, and it was worse than I thought. Of the 600 crew aboard, 73% had flatline, 10% showed signs of brain hemorrhaging, and the rest showed vital readouts offline. It was nothing short of a miracle that I woke up at all, let alone healthy. Even so, I doubt I would have considered myself fortunate. It was a useless gesture, but I decided to check for survivors. Really, given the circumstances, any gesture short of acceptance and death would have been useless. Still, if I had to resign myself to my grim fate, I figured I might as well go out with some company. It may have been cruel to wake them and make them aware of the dilemma, but the thought of being the last man alive just left me with a sour feeling in my stomach. I couldn't give up the chance to speak to another human being at least once more in my life. I wound up relying on a flashlight a few yards into the Deck 3 descent, and only the dimming emergency fluorescent tubes overhead lit those first few. At some point, the energy grid had failed in that sector and switched to the backup generators. depending on how long ago the system had redirected power, and if the lights were any reliable indication, it would have been no wonder that cryo-storage malfunctioned. I can't imagine the pain through which they must have gone. The thought made me shudder. I turned the flashlight on each cryopod as I passed by, and a few looked like they had died peacefully. But only a few. Most wore frozen faces of suffering, some with tears turned to ice streaking down their faces. Some of their harnesses had released, leaving their corpses leaning their bruised foreheads against the glass shields, necks broken and twisted against their own body weight. I even tripped over one whose shield had released and depressurized before clearing his system of the blood insulation solution. His corpse lay rotting in a half-curled heap where he had tumbled forward, eyes open and mouth agape. There are no decomposer organisms in space. Pre-launch sterilization makes sure of that, so bodies don't rot the way they do on Earth. Instead, he looked dried up and brittle, mummified, as though the slightest nudge would cause him to collapse into dust. With my attention fixated on the tragedy before me, I almost didn't hear it. A faint call, just a few yards down the walkway, barely above a whisper. My heart leapt, and I rushed to the sound as fast as my legs would carry me. Sadly, though, my hopes were dashed as I looked at his face, frostbitten beyond treatment. With chattering teeth, in an airy and raspy whisper, he pleaded, "Cold, so cold, please, please." His name was James Heinrich, a young cadet fresh from the Hirschmann Aerospace Training Facility in Nuremberg, Germany, and this was his first mission out of Earth's orbit. He was ambitious for one so young, just barely in his 20s, but it was the real go-getters who went far and moved up the chain of command. He was respectful, too, always addressing his elders as sir or ma'am, regardless of rank. We had spoken at length many times before and after launch, and he was an eager and attentive listener. I liked him right from the start. Poor kid. He had no idea he was already dead. I could tell by the look in his eyes. Not long before I discovered him, likely sometime within the prior 24 hours, his pod had sprung a coolant leak. It had already partially iced over the pods to his left and right, and it was probably dangerous to even stand as close as I did. The blood neutralizer had frozen solid in the leak, leaving him full of the insulation fluid. If I had released the chamber seal, the shock of the temperature and pressure changes would have paralyzed him, and without going through the neutralization process, he wouldn't have lived more than a single, painful hour. The cardiovascular neural regulator system had been keeping his heart beating, but it wouldn't help much longer. In truth, it had only prolonged his suffering. I would have liked nothing more than to repair the neutralizer system, but I had no training or authorization, and I'd have likely ended up killing him in the process anyway. Besides, the tissue damage from the frostbite was too deep and too severe. All I could do for him was put him out of his misery. He was such a good kid, and he had such a bright future. When I looked at his face, I saw my son, saw him as he might have looked on the day I should have returned, saw the sorrow on his face when he realized Daddy would never come home. It was all I could think about as I tearfully and hesitantly tapped in the command to stop the neural regulator. "It's okay, kid. Just sleep now. It'll be over soon," I told him, longingly placing my hand against the freezing glass. I spent his final moments with him as his heart slowed to a stop, and he closed his eyes for the last time. I never looked away. It was then that the gravity of my situation hit me. I truly was alone. It'd been about 5 months, and every day seemed longer than the last. Relying on only an automated lighting system to separate day from night can do that after a while. I remember watching old films back on Earth about people stranded on desert islands who had to survive on coconuts and crudely cooked indigenous fauna. Honestly, I can say that I now understand how they felt. Though, unlike them, my food supply was limited to the kitchen freezers, which somehow managed to survive the journey. In fact, the heating system was still up and running too. No hull breaches, and pressurization was still holding. Water filtration was fine. It was enough to make me wonder if some god out there had wanted me to live. What for? I can't even begin to imagine. Still, I've never liked the idea of suicide. We all lived, each day, knowing that death is the end of the line. So what made my situation any different? Maybe I was wrong in assuming mankind's extinction. For all I knew, we really did find another home. We could have left Earth behind over a century ago. Maybe someone figured out the error and didn't give us up for dead. Maybe their descendants were searching for us. With my state of affairs, it was hard to be optimistic, but I had to hang on to something. In the meantime, I did my best to keep my mind occupied. My days fell into routine. Wake up, exercise, shower, eat, sleep, and other health essentials. I also took care of a few things which could no longer be ignored. I patched up some of the minor damage and disarray, addressed some of the needed system maintenance that I could handle, and generally did whatever I could to keep my home and prison fit enough to let me live as long as possible. Eventually, I got around to disposing of the bodies in cryo-storage. It was a miserable job, but I still took my time with it. Before I closed each crate and jettisoned it into the vacuum of space, I gave the contained crew member a proper moment of silence. I honored their memories and would not close the lids until I could remember each of their names. Not in a verbal sense, as their cryo-storage pods displayed their names quite clearly. Rather, in a personal sense. A sense in which I could remember addressing them. Nobody should die without a name. I saved the kid for last. James. I closed my eyes and spoke his name aloud, over and over, never satisfied with how briefly the sound hung on the air. When I finally opened my eyes, I found his head turned towards me, staring at me unblinking. The sight startled me at first, but he wasn't breathing. By some last, gruesome spasm of the nerves that I would never medically understand, it was his final action. His eyes were a crystalline blue, and I regarded them for a while before gently closing them. I told myself again that it had to be some final spark of the nervous system, but how could it have been? He died months before, and I had watched his neural activity stop completely. Yet, just as I closed that lid, I swear that the low-hanging light touched and shimmered on the dampness of a single tear spilling down his cheek. That was the first manifestation of my encroaching madness. I guess its progress can be delayed for a time, but it inevitably finds you. In the months crawling by, it finally started to catch up with me. I kept up my normal routine at first, but more obsessive and neurotic behaviors slowly worked their way into the mix. I'd spend nights awake, sometimes curled into a ball at the foot of my bed, sometimes in the corner. Sometimes I'd talk to myself, not with delusions of other people in the room, but long monologues just to fill the unbearable silence. Then, after a while, the monologues started to become conversations. Worst of all, I began to neglect my healthier habits, in favor of spending hours seated before my comlink software, listening to hollow static and praying to hear a human voice. I would cycle through frequencies in desperate search of some type of connection. Any connection. I stopped eating, lost sleep, and often passed out at my console to the white noise lullaby of the open comm channel. After a while, I didn't care whether or not the voice on the other end could help me, or even if it wanted to. I didn't even care if the voice was human. I just wanted to know that somewhere, anywhere, someone or something other than myself still lived. And I regretted it from the moment I heard that first ghostly whisper.